Hi there. In this video, we're going to review creating objectives for your capstone proposal. So, some things to keep in mind. You will be creating two sets of objectives, one set for your experience and one set for your project. These objectives should be connected or related in some way. And there definitely may be some overlap depending on what you decide to do. Another way to think about it is that your experience objectives should be really linked to what you'll be doing in collaboration with your site and your site mentor. And your project objectives are something connected or a piece of that you're going to be sharing out to a larger, more occupational therapy focused audience. So your experience is an opportunity to really zoom in to the context of your site, and your project is an opportunity to then zoom back out and think about how to disseminate something that you did to other occupational therapy practitioners and sort of related audiences that it would be valuable to share. Your experience objectives that you'll be developing in your proposal will then be transferred over to Form E. Form E is your capstone experience evaluation form, and that form will follow you through your 14 weeks and really forms the structure to what you'll be doing. So those are the same objectives. Your project objectives will also go on to your project evaluation form. This form is coming later though. So while you'll draft up your project objectives now and really think about how you want the experience and the project to connect, you'll have a little bit longer of an opportunity to uh, think about those project objectives and come back to them. For both sets of objectives, you will be able to modify them throughout the process based on how things evolve, what sort of transpires throughout your capstone experience and project. These objectives can be a really good starting point for discussion with your site and with your advisor. Again, they really are meant to form the framework of what you're going to be doing, set some clear expectations as to what you'll be doing. So, really good to be collaborative about them as much as possible. So, one place to start that can be really helpful is thinking about the OT process and developing your capstone objectives, particularly your experience objectives. So, the OT process is evaluation, intervention, and outcomes. So, you can even start with having three objectives and building from there. So you could have one objective around evaluation, which you've already kind of started doing now. So really doing that needs assessment, evaluating what's needed at your site and what are the best ways to develop and implement whatever it is you're going to be doing. Then there's the intervention part. So really thinking about, how you're going to develop and then implement whatever it is you're going to be working on. So that intervention middle section, and then outcomes. So how are you going to be assessing the effectiveness or what, came out of the intervention phase and improving upon what you developed through those outcomes and thinking about how you can make, whatever you're doing sustainable and lasting after you have completed your capstone. So that's just one way, but I think a very helpful way to think about developing objectives. This sort of setup can also really help you think about your timeline. So this is a sample experience timeline. Again, everybody's is going to look a little differently. But in weeks 1 and 2, often there's finalizing your needs assessment, maybe doing a little bit more in-depth look at a specific area of the work you're going to be doing. Now that you're on site, have, more access to different people and other data points. Also, obviously getting oriented to your site and kind of understanding basic, what types of services they offer, how they're offered, what is kind of the daily or weekly flow like, et cetera, and how that's going to, support or impact your work. Then moving into weeks 3 and 4, maybe you're doing development of whatever it is you're going to be doing, recruiting participants, those sorts of activities. Moving into kind of the middle part, where you're going to be doing program implementation. So, implementing whatever it is you're doing. Maybe it's a training program, maybe it's some sort of group services, maybe it's a toolkit for practitioners. There's a lot of different options. So, but that's kind of often where the core of the middle part of your capstone experience is, actually implementing whatever it is you've developed. And then taking some time to measure outcomes, like I mentioned previously. And then for the last couple weeks, analyzing those outcomes, maybe reworking some of the stuff you've done based on that feedback, based on those outcomes, sharing out with your site kind of what your final end work is looking like, debriefing about, who's going to kind of carry this over, where is this going to live at your site, those sorts of wrapping things up sort of considerations. So another resource that can be really helpful for creating objectives is Bloom's taxonomy. So hopefully this is somewhat familiar in other sort of context. So, but you can really think about the different sort of verbs and actions that may come into your capstone work. I think often your objectives will live in these upper sort of categories. So thinking about, how you're going to implement or apply, different things. Are you examining something, analyzing something, or are you evaluating, selecting, that sort of thing, different things to use. And particularly create up here. So a lot of the work you'll be doing in your capstone is designing, constructing, developing, creating, that sort of thing. So there may be a variety of different levels of your objectives, which is fine. But hopefully these can be helpful just to kind of get you thinking about different objectives you may have. So, for your experience objectives, another way to frame this is what are you doing with and for your site? So, here's some examples, a variety of slides of different examples, which are available. And so, I'm not going to read these out totally, but I tried to give some examples of what a hospital, sort of more traditional setting would be. And so, you could see here, this student wrote in a kind of a deadline. You don't need to, but if that's helpful, or if that's what your site is looking for, you certainly can. So again, starting out with, really doing an in-depth needs assessment related to their specific focus on psychological needs and concerns. Then you can see this next objective builds on that, and they develop some educational materials and training resources related to the results of the needs assessment. And then at the end here, they have that outcomes sort of oriented objective where they're going to approve their training module by gathering feedback. So another example, so the student decided to break their objectives down into 5 different objectives. So again, you can do, there's no one number of objectives you need to have. Kind of depends on how you envision your capstone unfolding. Again, feedback from your site or your advisor, that sort of thing. So you can see the student started with, analyzing some specific elements of their site, socialization opportunities, nature-based activities. Then, again, looking at a more comprehensive needs assessment related to that. Then moving into presenting a summary of the needs and engagement patterns with some recommendations. Then, based on that, developing an indoor garden cart and some nature-based activities. And then developing resources to train the activities coordinator. So, again, looking at that sustainability. This is a site, an assisted living facility with no occupational therapist. So, there were some different considerations here. Another example is a school setting where there wasn't OT services, and that an OT was not the site mentor for the student. So, again, starting out with a more in-depth formal needs assessment that really builds on the needs assessment that's developed now in the proposal, and then implementing different strategies. This student was focusing on interoceptive awareness skill building for children. And then getting feedback, they incorporated that into here. They wanted to incorporate some family education, so they had an objective about that. And then creating a way to share out kind of the experience, the lessons learned from the strategies that they implemented as kind of the core of their capstone. So this included parent education, teaching education, and other ways to kind of share out and consult with the school they were working with. So project objectives, again, you want to think about what are you disseminating related to your experience, specifically for an OT audience or the OT community. So there's a lot of different, options that you can do for this. And again, you'll have a little bit more time to finalize these. You'll be drafting them this semester, but then you really won't finalize them until you get into your experience. And partly that is because I think a lot of students, once they get into actually doing their capstone experience, what they want to focus on for their project can become a little clearer. And so you can have a couple weeks to kind of settle in and really think about how you want your project and your experience to connect. So in these project examples, this student who worked in a community organization with no OT was really interested in applying the participatory occupational justice framework. And so the project was a really good opportunity to really dive into that. Whereas with the experience site, while she used the POJF in her work, they weren't as interested in maybe some of the specifics as they're, not an OT oriented organization. So in her project, she was really able to illustrate how she and then other OTs could use the POJF to work with community organizations. In her specific case, she was working on access to oral health and dental care in the community for adults with disabilities. So she then also wanted to develop guidelines for occupational therapy practitioners, again, to work in this sort of area with a focus on occupational justice. And she was looking at best practices for developing materials in this area. So hopefully you can kind of see how this is connected to sharing what she learned with other, OTs that would be interested in this sort of work. Also, your project can be a really nice opportunity to do some more theoretical or frame of reference application, in this case, the POJF. These are some project objective examples from a pediatric hospital that did work with OT. So, this is looking at synthesizing current literature related to the topic, developing an open educational resource. So that again would go beyond what was provided specifically for the site. So really opening it up to a broader sort of audience. And the student and their advisor developed specific objectives about the poster presentation they'll be doing. Um, Again, the focus was on age-appropriate education for children with spinal cord injury and related diagnoses. So again, you can see kind of different ways to organize your project objectives. There's no one way you need to do it. This example is a student who worked in a hand therapy clinic with OT, and this student really wanted to focus on a case study as his project. And so you can see that reflected in these objectives. So a case study can be a good example of something that maybe is definitely connected to the site. The student recruited from his site for his case study, but is really something that is student led and maybe not as much certainly relevant to the site, but maybe isn't a product directly for the site, like a, toolkit or group program manual might be. So he, had objectives around developing the questions for the case study, doing the interview, doing an analysis of the interview, and threading this idea around home exercise program adherence throughout. So I hope these were helpful examples and some guidelines for developing your objectives for your capstone. Thanks so much.